Ladies and gentlemen, we are Ketu Born and I'm Tanguy Jacopin. We are talking about the seminar of external analysis within strategy. And more specifically today, the topic will be what are the sources of a competitive advantage? So when we're talking about the competitive advantage, we're talking about the genesis of strategy. So it's important to gather this element. More specifically, it's fundamental to understand the importance of barriers to entry. In that sense, what can we say? We need to consider different stages. One, if you are the incumbent or leader, basically you have interest to generate them. Why? Like that, you will be able to maintain your competitive advantage over time. And if you don't have any, it will be really easy to take off your current position. Okay, really important that you get aware about it. Think over time what can be done in order to keep your advantage. So if you need to be present in the media, if you need to create many brands, for instance, cannibalization was invented in such a way. You create plenty of product, for instance, in the soap area, like Procter & Gamble did, and it's difficult to enter. This is some great advantage, and so this is one issue. Then you've got another issue that is not so intuitive, because normally when you think about barriers to entry, you don't think about economies of scale and at the geographical level, I mean. And here, what is important is that most of the time, I insist, most of the time, the barriers to entry are located at the regional level, and therefore it will depend on the ability to generate economies of scale at this level. To give an example, Walmart is a fantastic company, and most of the time of their existence, they were not in California, they were not in the East Coast, they were just in Bentonville and all around. It was a Midwest company. Now they were able to generate economies of scale around Bentonville, and this was the key success factor for them to grow. Okay, so now what we're going to see is that there are four major sources of competitive advantage. So it's interesting to use this element because when in two ways. One, because we are talking about external analysis, is to understand what are the reasons why your competitors are proficient, if they are. If they are not, what can they be tempted to do to become proficient? So this would be first area, and the second aspect would be, but more internal in that case, it would be what can you do to generate a more sustainable competitive advantage over time. Okay. So as you can see, just to go from the last to the first one, economies of scale with Walmart, we just commented it, so I'm not going to go back on it. Demand, it's linked with the customer retention based on average switching cost. For instance, was a typical example that Apple has created an ecosystem through which it's better to acquire another device of Cupertino-based company because it provides you so many advantages that if you use a device for another system, to be fair, we mentioned Microsoft among others, and Samsung or Google or whatever, and you've got this opposition of system. If you're able to generate this customer retention, which is the base, then you are sure to survive over time. Really important. And last one, but only few one can have access to this one, is based on supply. You got a cost advantage, you got the patent, you got the know-how that nobody can steal it to you. So it's a better one, because the other one you need to build them on your own. Here, what happened is that in the case of Aramco, the Saudi oil company, it's a state-owned company. It's obvious that in terms they've got lots of oil, and the ground is a property of the ownership of the kingdom of the Saudis. So it's impossible to play with them at this level. For the patent, it's a strategy to design new element, and you can see, if you look at the number of patents that were generated in the last decade, they are growing exponentially. Why? Because everybody tried to constitute a competitive advantage thanks to it. And the problem is that it could make sense if it was done on on behalf of the customer, but right now it's much more done based on creating a competitive advantage. And when you look at the battle between Apple and Samsung, just with the patent, who copy who, you can realize that they both copy themselves. But at the end, if they do it in the benefit of the customer, it's fine. But if you become generating hassle for the customer, then it becomes a problem. Okay, so really important to think about it, how you can generate economies of scale and customer retention and supply. This one, you have it or you don't have it. So it will be play with this one. Economies of scale, you need to be powerful. You're not going to a niche sector. So what is most important for the vast majority of company is this one, is the second one. Okay. Then you've got other sources of competitive advantage, and among these one, we're going to see that SMEs, small and medium enterprises, will have lots of difficulties to use these two. Because one implies benefiting from the government protection. Well, I put here Gazprom, I put a Russian company, but I could have mentioned an American company such as Bain, for instance, McDonnell Douglas. Yeah, any company is commodity or in the defense sector will benefit from it. And last but not least, and far more as well, I could say many banks that are considered a strategic asset for government. For instance, in US, it doesn't matter to let Lehman bankrupt as soon as Lehman fall down in American hands. When Lehman fall down, and the problem was it was such a big loss, nobody in the US wanted to get it back, and they are acquired by Nomura Securities. Then it's another problem. Okay, so. Pay attention to it. But for instance, Merrill Lynch is not a surprise. It was acquired by JP Morgan. So this is a big issue, as you can see. And last but not least, you've got the point of asymmetry of information that gives you a great advantage. Well, Goldman Sachs is one of the best to play with this. They've been accused for the subprime crisis about using it and making some bets and not giving some information. I don't want to enter too much into it, but what is obvious is that advisory rules should be far more detailed in the future to avoid that some companies may be condemned under or maybe put under scrutiny. At this point, some rules about what can you do, what can't you do, it would be it make lots of sense. But as you can see, these two ones cannot be used for SMEs, only for big companies. Okay, and it's even more important because information is always more available at low cost. So when you get asymmetry of information, it means you're a big player as well. Okay, so therefore, when we're talking about major sources of competitive advantage, there are 5 mainly: supply, demand, economies of scale, government protection, and asymmetry of information. The two one that can be the best one just before is demand for any of them. Customer fix about customer retention. As soon as you're growing, you will make necessary economies of scale, so you'll use it. You can try to play with asymmetry of information, but it's difficult. On supply, possible, above all if you got a good R&D department. Difficult, and government protection is only for last but not least, but for the happy few, let's say, how we can mention it. Okay, so try to think about it, because how you can boost it, how you can integrate it with your other department of your companies, and I'm sure that it would generate lots of benefit for your company. Okay, thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.